At this point, I'm going to just welcome everybody. Thank you so much for signing on to our Building Stakeholders for BRT webinar today. We've got a great series of speakers to share with you. I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves momentarily, but in the meantime, I'll mention them and then I'll introduce them. And they can introduce themselves. Ambre Marr, State Legislative Director from AARP Indiana in Indianapolis. Dave Steele, Executive Director for MobiliSE in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And Kyle Burrows, Manager of Arterial BRT Planning for Metro Transit in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. So thank you all for being with us today. It looks like we have resolved our chat functionality, and so I invite you to introduce yourself in the chat. We're hoping that you can all connect with one another as well as learn from our panelists today. We also invite you to share questions for the panelists in the Q&A section. So the chat's going to be reserved for interaction among attendees. And then if you'd like to ask a question of the panelists, please use the Q&A box that is also at the bottom of your toolbar. We are offering APA and AICP credits. To receive credits, you must attend this full webinar and then sign on to APA to log your credit hours. And please contact Mpact staff if you have any particular questions about that. I also want to highlight the fact that Volution, we rebranded at the end of last year. We are now Mpact, and invite you to visit our new website, impactmobility.org, to learn more about our rebrand. And we're still the same Volution under our new name, but we're really focused on the same collection of transit, land use, and community development issues and work. I want to just give a shout out to Move Roundtables. That's the program that I run here at Mpact. It's a place-based program that works with a local stakeholder group to look at a key issue through Move lenses: mobility, opportunity, voice, and equity. So it's a 6-week series involving about a dozen or 15 local stakeholders to really create momentum, be more collaborative, and move forward in a more unified direction. So invite you to learn more about this program on our website, impactmobility.org. There's highlights of particular places, including Indianapolis, Central Indiana, and Milwaukee, which is where 2 of our guests are from today. I also invite you to consider putting this on your calendar, putting a hold on your calendar for our upcoming Mpact Transit and Community Conference. It's going to be in Phoenix this fall, November 5th through 8th. Thinking about, transit expansion, mobility investments, land use, the built environment, and how to really leverage those investments for maximum community benefit. So please plan to join us in Phoenix, but also in the meantime, please keep your eyes peeled for our call for speakers, which is going to be happening this March. So we'd love to hear from you, your colleagues, your stakeholder partners in your region to think about, start now to think about what kind of response you might wish to submit for workshops for our call for speakers. Also invite you to listen to our podcast. It's called Mpact Voices. You can find that on our impactmobility.org website. And we actually have our podcast featuring Tamika Butler on community-centered transit. So I encourage you to check that out. At this point, I'm going to invite Hillary to turn on the poll for our attendees. And we're going to look at, what stage are you in your BRT journey? Give this just 30 more seconds for you to respond. So it looks like about half of you are considering BRT, thinking about it. About 20% of you have BRT that's funded in your jurisdiction. 10% of you have BRT that's under construction. The minority of you have operational BRT systems, so only 7%, and 18% of you are looking to expand your current system. So got quite a range here, but I just want to note that about half of you are just thinking about BRT, so it's a good opportunity to learn. And again, encourage you to put your questions for the panelists in the chat. We'll try to get to those at the end of the session. And for those of you who are unable to get your questions answered, also encourage you to contact our speakers directly. They will be sharing contact information with you as they introduce themselves and their local BRT context. And with that, I think I'm going to turn to our speakers. Just a little bit about our format of today. We have 3 speakers, which are each at 3 stages of BRT at 3 different scales. So we've got a lot of different layers to consider here, state, local, and regional layers. And then they're all at different stages of operation and build out of their BRT lines as well. So right now, each speaker will ground our discussion by setting the stage with their local context and current picture of BRT. We're going to start with Kyle and then move to Amber and Dave. They will introduce themselves and their local BRT context, and then we're going to get into some questions and then some audience questions that follow. So thank you, Kyle.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Give me 1 second here to share my screen. And as Sarah noted, I'll just take us through a few slides to kind of ground us in the discussion about where we're at in the Minneapolis-St. Paul, Twin Cities region here and our arterial BRT program. So Sarah, can folks see my slides there? Great. So as Sarah noted, my name is Kyle O'Donnell Burrows. I am the planning manager for arterial BRT at Metro Transit. And I'll just give us a quick overview of sort of where we're at in our BRT journey and kind of what the role that early success has kind of played in our overall development of the program. So taking a quick step back to the big picture, right now we have a planned network of 8 arterial BRT lines by 2030. Just this past December, so December 2022, we opened our 3rd line, the D line, which is our longest BRT line and one of the longest transit lines in our region. And we had opened previously the A line in 2016, which is our first line, and the C line in 2019. 2 more of those planned lines are fully funded. So the B line and E line plan to open in 24 and 25. And then 3 planned lines are pending full funding, the F, G, and H line. We do plan to initiate also a sort of on a 5-year basis, kind of an update to these plans to kind of continue to identify those lines further down the alphabet. So like many BRT systems, I think folks will be pretty familiar with this type of thing. We're talking here about arterial BRT. So these operate primarily in mixed traffic on sort of existing roadways and existing roadway infrastructure. We take those high ridership, high capacity local bus lines and sort of make these style of improvements to get to a arterial BRT network that is faster, more reliable, and easier to use. I'll kind of just really quickly skim through this, but I think the key features of our system are really focusing on those limited stop service, so about 2 to 3 stations a mile. And at those stations, we have a lot of improved amenities. So we're looking at light and heat at every station with shelters, real-time signage, security features, and then pre-boarding fare payments. So folks will pay their fare prior to getting on the bus, and that really speeds things up and speeds things along. Our service is frequent and all-day style service, really trying to get at those trips that kind of are all-purpose trips, not just that 9 to 5 style commute. This has been particularly true, obviously, in sort of our pandemic and the kind of situation we find ourselves in now. And then that other piece rounding out transit signal priority, so making sure the buses can get through red lights quickly, and increasingly bus-only lanes on kind of key congested segments, and working with our municipal partners on where we can best apply those treatments to this style of service as well. So as I noted earlier, the A line was our first arterial BRT line in the Twin Cities. It opened in 2016 and substantially replaced an existing high ridership, high frequency local bus route, the Route 84, that operated primarily along Snelling Avenue and Ford Parkway, 46th Street in St. Paul and Minneapolis. Along this route, I think some of the things that it's not, the highest ridership route that we have in our system, but is, among the top routes. And I think it also kind of had some other additional attractive features to make it our first arterial BRT line, including connections to several key destinations, colleges, universities, Blue Line, and at the time planned Green Line, and then some dense residential and commercial districts along the corridor as well. In addition to being a good opportunity to partner with our roadway authority, in this case MnDOT, with some projects that they had ongoing on this project as well. So what did we do to kind of lead up to that successful implementation? I think before 2016, and it seems like this is true in a lot of the cases for the folks on the call as well, arterial BRT was a new concept in the Twin Cities. Folks, we had LRT operating here and commuter rail, and then sort of different varieties of local and express bus. And so this was something a little bit different, a little bit new. One of the key things we did to really get up to that successful launch was establish an internal, cross-functional working group over the 2 years prior to the launch that really honed in on those key technical details, establishing those key features, and then working through that planning process as well. That, both built trust internally and kind of helped us answer a lot of those key technical questions that we really hadn't done before. I think related to that, we had a lot of strong coordination with our roadway and municipal partners. So in our context here in our region, we don't own any of the roadway right-of-way, and we're not a roadway authority. So everything we do in the public right-of-way on the roadway needs to be coordinated with our municipal partners. We spent a lot of time putting in that groundwork. And then we really wanted to make sure that we were getting out in front of our key stakeholders through a variety of tools, meeting folks where they are. So that's having community group sessions, office hours at organizations and along businesses along the corridor, and really framing up our message to address the concerns that that key stakeholders would have. And consider and really take seriously those questions and perspectives, and really kind of framing arterial BRT as something that's obviously good for transit riders, but good for all users along this corridor as well. So this is just kind of an example of how we thought about some of that framing. This image here was an existing bus stop on the Route 84 that was served by the 84 before the A line went into place. You can see quite a bit of space dedicated to cars, a little bit of space here dedicated pulling out of the roadway for the bus to stop, and then not very much space for anything else. So people are walking through here, waiting for the bus here, trying to window shop here at this store. All that's very, very confined space. This is not a great situation for the store owner where folks are kind of leaning up against their windows, blocking the views. You can see the bus shelter here is kind of adjacent to the store awning there. So not great for everybody. Comparing that to arterial BRT and really thinking about that as a better for all users on that street space where we're bumping out and stopping in the turn lane adds that additional space for users where we have an unobstructed sidewalk space and access to storefronts, plenty of space for transit riders to wait and access their vehicle, and then the bus stopping in the lane really kind of speeds things along there without having to wait for traffic. So that's just kind of an example of a communication tool we use to kind of frame some of those stakeholder discussions. I think really the key driver for the rest of our program is that we have seen early success. So the A line we're focused on, but also the C line, which was opened in 2019, both saw greater than 30% ridership growth in this corridor, immediately following opening day. So right away we see a big, big response to our riders, from our riders and from our community. I think, more relevant now is that we've seen these style of services retain riders more than our local service and also in our express service during the pandemic era. So these are still people are still responding to this service, still taking these trips, and they're still these types of corridors are really filling that need. So that early success has really led to kind of success building on itself, and I'll just kind of run through quickly here. So I noted the C line we opened in 2019. In 2021, we've gone back in partnership with the city of Minneapolis to implement bus-only lanes, kind of reinvesting in that corridor. D line we just opened in December of 2022. We've had a lot of success on this route so far. Results are still very preliminary. B line, I think, has been getting a lot of attention as well in 2024, where we have receiving a lot of federal and regional and state and local investment in that project, and a buy-in from our partners to really be implementing a pretty robust bus-only lane system on this line. And then the E line in 2025 is sort of the latest thing that we've got coming down the line with a number of coordinated roadway projects. And so with that, I'll close there and pass it on to the next presenter, and happy to answer questions when we get to that point.
Great. Thank you so much, Kyle. I see a couple of questions in the chat, and I'm just going to request that you redirect those to the Q&A so we can track them more consistently. And I'm also going to mention that we're going to be sharing both the presentations and the recorded webinar on our website in a few days at impactmobility.org/webinar. With that, I'm going to turn to Amber to share about Central Indiana.
Thanks, Sarah. Hopefully you can see my slides okay. My name is Ambre Marr, and I am the State Legislative Director for AARP Indiana. And I am going to give kind of a little bit of a different perspective of our context for BRT. And the overview for us, I'm going to make sure my slides are advancing here. There we go. So we started back in 2014, where we passed a piece of legislation authorizing 6 of our central Indiana counties that were able to create a dedicated transit fund source for these projects via a public referendum. There was obviously a lot of collaboration and need for coalition work, as well as community engagement to get this bill passed, even at the State House, in order to allow us to begin this dedicated fund. So fast forward to 2016, where from 2014 of passing the piece of legislation all the way to 2016, we really ran a huge campaign to make sure that everyone in the surrounding area knew what this was going to say on the ballot. By the time we made it to election day, actually almost 60% of our Marion County voters approved the referendum, creating that dedicated tax. We had so much momentum going into this particular achievement. So I would say after 2016, receiving that dedicated fund, we did still need the approval from our Indianapolis City County Council. So then in 2017, we had to, kind of shift gears, and instead of working with the legislature and then the community, we then had to turn to our city councilors and allow them to adopt that proposal, which we knew they were very supportive. So in 2017, we were able to receive that support and enact that dedicated tax. So from 2017 to 2019, all of that work for our first line was being done. Our first line was referred to as the red line. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and show you kind of what that looks like here in a second. After the red line opened in 2019, we went straight into the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, I guess not quite yet, but we went into the 2020 session that sort of showed us where we had some issues going on. We had several legislators at the State House that were continuing to try to prevent our build out of our transit system here in Indianapolis. And so we worked exceptionally hard around, continuing to fight against those amendments that would have essentially crumbled our transit system. And then after that session, while we were successful in keeping all of that at bay, the pandemic did hit. But that did not stop our legislature from continuing to sort of every session there forward to try to stop the progress, talk about some of the issues that we had been dealing with the build out of the red line, just not really understanding the need for transit. I think a lot of the legislators that were being faced with some of these conversations were from other communities across the state. So they weren't necessarily being put up against or seen or being able to ride our BRT every day. And so they weren't really quite sure where to fall in line, whether they were supportive of transit, whether they weren't supportive of transit, if they didn't have a robust transit system in their area. So when you're looking at our legislative session in 2021, there were amendments to continue to limit our Indigo funding and the expansion of our rapid transit lines. And so from sort of when the red line opened to even into 2022, we have really been trying to just continue the support for transit, not necessarily in our community, but with our policy leaders. So we were successful in fighting off amendment after amendment after amendment in 2021 to continue to prevent that sort of monetary outlook on what that Indigo could use for the build out of the transit system. In 2022, there were more amendments that were proposed to limit the funding and, continued expansion of the rapid transit lines at every angle. It didn't matter what it was. There were many legislators that were trying to sort of get at how they could halt any progress around this. It was trying to put a stop to dedicated lanes, all of that. So we spent the majority of our 2022 session again trying to continue to hold off on those amendments, and we were successful again, which was so great. But we have just really been playing, dodgeball around keeping transit support and then also trying to manage what our policy leaders believe in transit. So one of the things that we did is in December of 2021, AARP Indiana released a transit survey. It talked about the support again from the community. It actually was a huge discussion data point around people who supported the dedicated lanes here in Indianapolis. And we really used that to push forward our support and to continue to not allow those amendments to go through to dismantle our transit system. During this time of session in 2022, the Purple Line construction started. So that was a positive. The funding that they were actually trying to dismantle was around our blue line. So the good news was our Purple Line was still able to break ground. And then while that same time was happening, there were more enhancements needing to be done and some projects around the red line because, I think sometimes people believe that once you build a transit system, that's all you have to do. And I think that's important to recognize because we don't feel that way about road funding, or we don't feel that way about building streets or bridges. Those need work as time goes on. And I think that, that's something that was really interesting to hear people talking about, is that well, the red line was just built and there's other things that need to be taken care of again. And I think that mentality is something that we really tried to explain, that just because you build a transit system doesn't mean it's completely done and you never have to go back. So we were really trying to shift that perspective as well. And the other thing that I did not have on our 2022 was this is actually this past October, we were engaged in the Move Roundtable, which was so helpful for us to sort of start looking at how we can continue to keep this supportive transit, not only locally, but also statewide, since we have had so many years of just, trying to combat discussions around transit and not necessarily having all of that support and encouragement that we had when we first started. So what's next? Right now, we are entering into a budget session. Session actually started yesterday. Indigo is going to continue to remain a potential target. So we are going to continue to try to move forward with all of the support that we are needing and the stories that can go along with it for our policymakers. This is really what we're looking forward to, is that blue line construction. We seem to really cannot move forward until we get people on board with the fact that this is happening, that BRT is needed. Hopefully the purple line, as it's continuing to be constructed, will also show all of those important opportunities that it brings to our city, as well as the local improvements that will come with that. So anyway, we are looking at all of this currently, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about is the Transit Drives Indy Coalition is the title of that coalition that we have been working in way back from the start of these projects. And so I think you know, I'm happy to share that link to the website. It has a whole host of information as to how we have collaborated with stakeholders, not just then, but also, you know, throughout the sessions and all of the messaging that we've used, as well as a link to our AARP survey that I think is really telling just about our community and how much support we have in our community, and that we really are facing the struggles with our policymakers at the State House, and how not everyone that lives in this community understands how successful it can be or how needed it is. And so that was something else that we were really wanting to share with all of you. So really quickly, I will just run through this. This is our red line. That is our State House. It's actually right outside my window. And the red line is, like I said, it was built in 2016. And as far as the purple line, which just broke ground, this is what it hopefully will look like. And what the line all the way, you know, where it goes and how many stops it has. And again, that just broke ground last sort of February. And then this is what our blue line will eventually look like. And hopefully we can continue to keep that funding alive and not allow any bills or amendments to take this away from us. The red line runs the north side of Indianapolis to the south side. The purple line runs from the northeast side of Indianapolis before joining the red line's route. And then the blue line is hopefully going to run east and west with access to the Indianapolis airport. So I will stop there, Sarah, and turn it over to our next speaker. But that's just my information if you need to contact me for any other questions or comments. Thank you.
To turn to Dave. And then once Dave concludes his presentation, I have a couple questions, and then we'll go to questions from the audience as well. Thank you so much for your questions. Kyle, thank you for responding to the questions in the box. We'll move to Dave in Milwaukee.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. Really happy to be here and see so many people from all over North America here in the chat box. I'm Dave Steele. I'm with an organization called MobiliSE, based in Milwaukee. And I'm going to talk really briefly about BRT in Milwaukee and our role as a nonprofit convener and advocate to encourage really true transformative BRT by, you know, putting forth a more expansive vision for what bus rapid transit could mean, not just for transit, but for our community in general. Next slide, please, Hillary. So we have three legs of the stool of our organization. We're a convener, we advocate, and we act. Now our convenings and our advocacy are very intentionally regional and very intentionally inclusive of not only communities in the city that rely on transit, but really a regional approach, including suburban communities. And what really brings the suburban communities and the urban communities to the table to talk about transit is the challenges around workforce and workforce shortages in our region. But you know, we also act. We have been the recipient of state funding from the state of Wisconsin to expand and oversee a on-demand transportation program called Flex Ride Milwaukee, which is an on-demand microtransit program. You can go to the next slide, Hillary. Thank you. So, every organization, I think, especially in the advocacy space, really has to focus in on their why and what is the challenge that we're looking to address. And I think this map here really addresses our why. This is the goals that we seek to achieve. For those of you not familiar with our region, that squiggly line here on the right is Lake Michigan. And, the large blue chunk, that's Milwaukee, mainly the city of Milwaukee and some of the inner suburbs. The blue areas represent where fixed route transit exists. The red areas exist where it does not exist, but where high concentrations of jobs exist. So we have half of our jobs in our region outside of the scope of transit. We're one of the largest US metros in the United States without a regional transit authority. And funding has been a tremendous challenge for our transit agencies across our region for many, many years, for many of the same reasons that our colleagues in Indianapolis have encountered. But our organization as an advocate really sees BRT and well done, well planned BRT as a real game changer towards reimagining what transit can be in our region, building support for it, building ridership around it, and ultimately showing that our racial equity issue that transit represents in our region here goes hand in hand with economic development, that you can have a game-changing economic development transportation system from an economic development standpoint, while also addressing the racial inequities in our region. Now, a huge leader on this has been Milwaukee County. They're one of the first, actually the first municipality in the US, long before the pandemic, to declare racism to be a public health crisis. They've been a national leader on racial equity, and transportation has been a key component of that. But along with that comes our business partners in the business community who understand that not only racial equity being an economic development issue, but also the connectivity to workers that I mentioned. Next slide, Hillary. Where we're at in our BRT journey is we're just starting out here. Our organization had been highly supportive of our first bus rapid transit route, which will be opening here in June of 2023. It is a $50 million project and a 9-mile route, which goes from downtown Milwaukee to the Milwaukee Regional Medical Center in one of our inner ring suburbs of Wauwatosa. And it was designed and planned this way before the pandemic, really to serve, two very large activity centers. About half of the route is dedicated lanes. The other half is mixed traffic. The vehicles are all electric vehicles. This is one of the snazzy new vehicles that they launched. Now, our organization, MobiliSE, we want to see this succeed because one of the greatest challenges that we have in our region and in our state is, despite a fairly robust transit system and a great transit history in our city, in our region, the greatest pushback we always encounter from decision makers in our state capital and elsewhere is, well, no one will ride it. There is no market for transit in our region. We're a car-dominated area. So we need to see this succeed, and we're cautiously optimistic about the success of the East-West BRT. But if we go to the next slide, we can talk about the future of BRT in our region and our efforts in partnership with AARP Wisconsin and with the Move Roundtable and Mpact to ensure that the future of BRT in our region can be truly transformative and show that not only will individuals ride the service, but it can be transformative from an economic development, racial equity standpoint, and truly transformative for our communities. In the summer of 2022, actually spring and summer of 2022, we engaged with Mpact and the Move Roundtable and AARP Wisconsin to build a diverse regional coalition of individuals along the corridor of 27th Street, which really runs the entire length of our county from north to south through a very diverse cross section of our neighborhoods and our communities. And, we brought in national speakers through Mpact to help our stakeholders really envision what this BRT project could look like. And our goal here is to really develop and craft and disseminate a much broader vision for BRT. We believe that our current east-west BRT, we've been down that road. We've seen some of the pushback and the difficulties that were encountered in planning that as a true BRT. And we want to get ahead of that so that in the future we can offer our decision makers really a clear vision and a clear why for what BRT could mean. And this picture here that I have was from one of our van tours, or a van tour that we did with AARP and Move Roundtable. And this is a very familiar scene for, I'm sure, any one of us here on the call, especially in the US or in the Midwest. This is a building that used to be a Kmart back in the day, and now is highly underutilized, and would be right on the next BRT route. So this is, an example of underutilization that could be fully actualized with transit-oriented development, the potential to truly transform communities, not just, with a bus route and a dedicated lane, but with development and walkability and access to jobs close to our population centers. So it's really about developing that vision, like I said, and putting that out there so that someday, when our decision makers, both locally and the state, make these decisions, it can be not just between a traditional bus route and a BRT. It can be between stagnation and the current development patterns that we've seen, and something that's truly more expansive and future oriented and a game changer for our region. So with that, those are my slides. I'm really happy to address any questions, and I'll drop my contact information into the chat. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, speakers. Thanks for all of the interaction that's happening in the Q&A as well as on the chat. I'm going to invite Hillary to share the second poll with everyone as we transition to kind of the Q&A portion of our webinar. While that's happening, I'm going to just ask Kyle, as you, just given that the first line was so pivotal in kind of helping people understand what BRT really was, and building a sense of support both politically and with the public, what do you think the elements were that made for a successful first launch? And I guess kind of as half of our audience is considering BRT, as as Amber and Dave in their cities respectively are working to launch BRT, what kind of lessons learned would you share with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a couple of pieces. So one is, like, as I mentioned, strong coordination with our municipal and roadway partners, really looking for opportunities potentially to coordinate with existing roadway or existing construction projects. We did that a little bit on Snelling Avenue in St. Paul with the A line, but there's a lot of groundwork going into building that trust and that communication with our city and county and MnDOT partners, especially when we're trying something new on their right of way. So take that very seriously. I would also say, active stakeholder engagement. This here, I'm thinking of like our riders and members of the public, and particularly folks who have an interest, either a business or a residence, like next to a station neighbor, for example. Take those concerns seriously and really respond to those concerns and questions without necessarily, always, respond to the concerns without necessarily buying into the premise of the concern. I think this might get to some of the traffic pieces. I think we've all seen this where that is a perennial concern, no matter what change to the roadway you're proposing. So we did traffic analysis and traffic studies and on the impacts of BRT, and we kind of help assuage those concerns and kind of take those seriously, and then kind of keep moving forward. But that's not the only reason that we're doing things. And if there is a traffic impact, that's not necessarily a deal breaker. I think for the A line in particular, identification of the right corridor was very important. So most of the success of this program has come from the success that the A line, that 30% ridership growth on the A line, that like just rider experience, everybody really sees it as a big positive. And that comes, from picking a higher ridership route. It doesn't have to be the highest route. Transit supportive land uses in the corridor. You want to have a lot of people who like wish that they could use transit if transit was just a little bit better in that corridor. And then, kind of having it be a key position within the overall transit network. So A line connected to the blue line, to the green line, to a number of other connecting local routes. Very important to kind of have that. And then, from the funding side, we had that early MnDOT investment that I was mentioning, that coordinated project. We also applied for and received some competitive federal grants that are awarded through our regional solicitation process that our MPO manages, the Met Council. And then we had some one-time state funding to kind of help get us over that gap as well. So those are kind of key pieces that went into the success of the A line. But really, the program is like, once A line was operating, now people can have something to point to and respond to and really want, as opposed to be a little bit skeptical of.
Thank you. Amber, as you're looking to, with BRT currently under construction in Indianapolis, anything from Kyle that really resonates with you?
So I think, I agree that having that first line really does show what other lines could look like. I think, unfortunately, we lost that here in Indianapolis somewhere along the way. At first, it was so great. Our ridership was up. People were excited about it. Not really sure what that pivotal moment was where our legislature sort of got a negative view after that. I think a lot of it maybe did deal with the dedicated lanes and the fact that, sort of something I even said in the chat is we're very car centric here. And I think that sort of the patience that it needed to kind of get adjusted to having those buses on those dedicated lanes and like making sure that people can learn how to navigate our roads, especially one ways downtown here in Indianapolis, and what that looks like for those dedicated lanes in the bus. I think it sort of created more anxiety and some frustration instead of continuing to see like this is so great for our city. So we kind of didn't go in that same direction that Kyle talked about, but it was like that at first. It just didn't remain that way here. And so since then, and just sort of some other issues that we might have had along the way did sort of highlight that maybe, transit isn't the way of the future. A lot of people thought we should continue to use Uber and continue to look at automated vehicles. And I think that mentality just wasn't being thought about, is that someone on a regular basis can't necessarily afford Uber daily. So having a connected transit system, especially for conferences and people who live here and individuals that either choose or can't have a vehicle, is really important to note. So for us, gathering those stories and continuing to keep that as, a reasoning for the community to have it so people can age in place, they can live in their homes and communities for as long as they want to. I think those were things that we have had to bring to the forefront. But I love what Kyle said. I just wish maybe we had been as successful after our first line was built. So
Thanks, Amber. And Dave, you're kind of in a similar place looking at the build out of the first east-west BRT corridor in Milwaukee, and then subsequently this 27th Street corridor that you're focused on. Thinking about like really what that could become. And part of the challenge there, as you've mentioned, is knitting together that sense of unity or the sense of corridor identity, if you will. Could you share a little more about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. It's a huge challenge in our region. We are Milwaukee metro area is one of the most racially and economically segregated regions in the United States. Along with that, both historical and current, reality facing our communities comes a great disconnect. We focused on, our organization is really based on the premise that we can bring leadership together in good faith and really talk about the things that we can do. We have a lot of conversations in our city, in our region around all the things that we can't do. And we do have tremendous challenges from funding and the lack of an RTA that really is related to our relationship with the state government. But understanding the things that we can work on together to bridge regional divides and, really address the issues of workforce shortages, which is a huge challenge in our suburban communities, and unemployment, which is a tremendous challenge in many of our communities around the region, both city and suburban. So, it's a big believer in keep it simple and, really focusing on what those benefits are. I think one challenge that we have in our region is few of our decision makers really ride buses, and clearly communicating the benefit of a BRT in the sense of frequency. I mean, our current, the new BRT that's going to be up and running here in a few months is going to be operating on a 10-minute frequency during peak periods in the morning and afternoon. And if you've relied on the bus on a daily basis, anyone that has can attest that the difference between a 20-minute frequency bus and a 10-minute frequency bus really is life-changing. And, that's an overused word a lot, it's life-changing, but it truly can be, especially when you're going a long distance to get to your workplace. So it's, conveying the benefit of it in that respect, and really, putting forth a vision that's truly expansive and inclusive of what our region could be if we really get after true transformative BRT. And that's been the work of our 27th Street corridor. People want to see change. Neighborhoods in the city want to see change along that corridor, and neighborhoods in the suburbs want to see change along that corridor. Neighborhoods in the suburbs have large empty parking lots like I showed in the picture. And neighborhoods and communities in the city have a different host of concerns but it's all interrelated. So, it's really weaving that through line through of what this project could be. And again, to really help shape that narrative in the years ahead so that it's not a binary choice of, take away a car lane in exchange for a bus lane. Like that's, as we've seen in the original East-West BRT, the one that's coming online here, that can often break in the way that we don't want it to be. But if it's take away a car lane, have a truly transformative BRT, and get the chance for new development, walkability, greater sustainability, access to workers, all these other things, and that's a different kind of proposition.
Thanks, Dave. Just want to revisit our second poll here. It looks like about half of you have ridden BRT a handful of times. About a quarter of you have never ridden BRT. So invite you to the Twin Cities, to Indianapolis, and to Milwaukee to try it out. The rest of you, there's another kind of quarter of you have ridden it once or ride it regularly. So I think this just points to the fact that it is hard to understand BRT if you have not ridden it before, and hard to really conceptualize how it can really transform your city. I want to think about, for our panelists, when you think about BRT, I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to this opportunity of transit-oriented development and what that really looks like along the corridors, or what you imagine for the possibilities of that. How much of that is a conversation that's happening where you are?
I can start us off with that. So I think we have a fairly robust sort of TOD program really here in the Twin Cities. We're fortunate enough that the Met Council has sort of a lot of TOD office, and then TOD planning work, and then Metro Transit ourselves also have a TOD office. And so they are really kind of that one-stop place for developers and kind of planners as well, to kind of help identify good opportunities and really facilitate that the development along these transit investments that we're making, to really kind of help maximize that development. So they're an existing resource, which is great, because a lot of times developers want to kind of see this opportunity, connect in, don't know exactly how to do that. So our staff in the TOD office really lead that. They also develop a number of reports and studies looking at the impact of transit on development. So I think just in, I guess it's 2021, it was completed. There was sort of a development trends along transit report, and maybe I can just drop that in the chat once I'm done here, where sort of looking at sort of the before and after on these investments and help make the case for transit from a development perspective, which is, not the only piece of the puzzle, certainly when we're thinking about these, but obviously a very important piece of kind of what the purpose or what the rationale for some of these investments are. And certainly it goes a long way with a lot of our variety of stakeholders that we engage with.
And Sarah, I just wanted to jump in here too to say, as far as transit-oriented development, here in Indianapolis, our city council actually did pass a TOD ordinance which amended the city's zoning ordinance to support housing diversity, enhanced walkability, and context-based design that supported greater connectivity. As far as a statewide view of transit-oriented development for our transit here in Indianapolis, I would say that it was sort of we had a lot of businesses that were supportive of it, and then we had some very vocal businesses that were not supportive of it. And so I think that view has contributed to some of the belief in our state house about how maybe transit development or transit oriented development isn't really happening, or that people don't support that, or that it's not needed. And I think that now, especially around our housing discussions, that it's very interesting to kind of see how people are talking about that, or where businesses are moving to, which might be along our red line, to actually continue that. Because if housing is popping up, there's other businesses that need to be around that they would actually gain, individuals frequently in their location when it is like that. So we do have a lot of great things happening around that. And then we still have some individuals where that thought process, they feel as though maybe businesses are being harmed by being along those lines, because it takes away parking, it takes away, the ability for people to go there. And it's like, well, actually it makes it easier. But it's really hard to see that if people aren't experiencing it. So I see Dave shaking his head.
A mind shift there. Dave, you're nodding.
Yeah, no, I so many similarities with Indianapolis, and happy that you all there in Indy are kind of our guinea pig to that we can learn from as we move forward here on our journey. TOD is one of those things that decades ago was done in Milwaukee all the time. They didn't call it TOD; it was just more of a transit-oriented city back in those days. And now, we have to be conscious about it and really kind of package it in that sort of way. And, we've, and I didn't mention, but, we have a downtown streetcar route, which was highly controversial when it was built. It was brought out in 2018, just before the pandemic. And we have seen strong evidence of development being spurred by that streetcar route that is, that is a TOD type of development. We might not call it that. The jury is out about the BRT's impact on TOD and development along the route. We are optimistic about it, and we're encouraging our leadership across the region to embrace that. But one of the biggest challenges that we have here is our land use decisions are highly localized. And BRT route number 2, the 27th Street route, which we've been working on with the Move Roundtable and Mpact, will go through 5 separate municipalities, each one with their own land use code and zoning codes. It's a tremendous challenge to have a unified sort of TOD vision going through, so many different entities. But that's where, we come back to that larger vision, and what the Move Roundtable and Mpact is helping us develop here with our stakeholders is really socializing the benefits of that, not just for workforce connectivity, but for the future, for walkability, for sustainability, folks aging in place, just a whole host of reasons.
We're almost at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go do a round robin, 1 minute, final question for each of you, which is simply, as we're talking about building stakeholders for BRT, can you share about an unexpected stakeholder? Who was that? What is their role? how has it really affected your BRT line? And then any other brief words of wisdom you'd care to share with our audience today. We'll start with Dave because you've been last in our series.
Yeah, words of wisdom. You know, I don't know that we're really in a position to be dispensing words of wisdom on BRT, just kind of starting out here. I'd really look more towards Indy or Cleveland. I would say, you know, start with listening to, you know, all stakeholders, you know, especially the transit riding public, and have an asset-based mentality about it. You know, we hem and haw in our region a lot about transit, as we should, but we often forget that we have the third highest per capita transit ridership in the Midwest, behind Chicago and the Twin Cities. And that's really because of a very strong bus system that's been here for many, many, many years, serving a lot of people. So how can we make that better? And BRT is an opportunity to make that better. And if we start from that premise of building on what we were already doing right, I think we stand a better chance of success than saying we have to throw away everything that we did before and you know, start anew.
Thank you.
I can just jump in here too. I think one of the things that is often not necessarily forgotten, but not something that you would highlight, especially with our Move Roundtable, we always really worked extremely closely with the chambers. But I would say even the Restaurant and Lodging Association, especially with the way workforce is right now, having them on board, not necessarily like, you know, that we know they've always been supportive of it, but bringing them and looping them into our messaging and helping them understand like what we're saying, because they're saying it too, especially with getting people from point A to point B and where their, you know, businesses aren't getting the workforce that they need. So I think that that was exceptional for our Move Roundtable, is just getting all of those people in one room. Whereas normally, you know, not that we ever thought that they weren't a part of the support, but really helping to elevate that support and show why there's just one more reason that transit is so important.
So an unexpected stakeholder. Yeah, that's a tough question. You know, I think for us, it's difficult to say who exactly would be unexpected. Maybe I'll say, you know, I think as the program has grown, we've increasingly had champions in our city and county, in particular, you know, electeds, particularly in kind of the core Minneapolis and St. Paul. And that has been definitely a source of benefit for us as our having our municipal partners be strong supporters of our program, obviously is kind of essential to its success. So not exactly a surprise, but certainly a welcome champion.
Thank you. We are at the top of the hour, so just want to recognize and thank our panelists for participating today. Thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom with all of us. Thank you to all of our attendees for your time as well, for your questions, for your interaction. I invite you to, we've been able to address many of the questions online, but if your question was not answered, invite you to connect with our speaker panelists separately to follow up. And just a reminder, our webinar will be posted along with the presentations online on our website in a few days, impactmobility.org/webinar. Thank you so much for attending.